everyone. My name is Ninel Anderson. I'm CEO of Devoted Studios, and I'm your host at Devoted Speakeasy. Tonight, we're going to have a very interesting conversation with Richard and Sam, who are from Galaxy Interactive, which is a $325 million venture fund that specializes in investing in blockchain and gaming and interactive experiences. And Rhys, who's a great friend of mine and has a very unique consulting company that helps other companies to build value, which is very important. And I have no idea how he does it. So I think through the pandemic, especially, we've been, seeing all this news about how other industries are struggling and how gaming industry is booming. So what a great opportunity for everyone just to grow their businesses, start new companies, building content. But how do you do it? Like, do you just go outside in the street and like, hey, venture fund companies, I have a gaming startup, can you give me money? Like, we wanted to put together an episode where we can all learn what is the process and what are the steps on attracting capital, what should we know about that, and also how can one make a company attractive. So what do you guys think are the 5 most important things to see in the company's pitch?
Richard, go.
The first thing I love to see is just micro level understanding of what you're building and what is your right to build this thing and what do you understand about this thing that very few other people do. And that could be born out of your own personal experience, it could be born out of your own personal interests, but it has to be something that is gonna keep you motivated throughout the very difficult process of building a company. The other thing I want to see that's not in the pitch is, and this is what you get from the video calls, is how founders interact with each other. Because, having, that person whose shoulder you can cry on, as you're building this thing it's so important, right? Just because of all the unexpected things that punch you in the face. I really want to get a sense of the track record to a lot of our points on team and their ability to navigate all of the challenges of building a studio. And then I guess we have to talk about like a market element as well. Like going back to our comments about, is this a venture backable opportunity? Like there's a ton of cool ideas that just don't have venture level scale. So tell me why we can make money off of this thing. And then I guess the last thing I'd point to is just, what's your unfair advantage, right? Like it could be, the idea is very, very rarely so innovative and unique that it itself is a moat. Ideas are not a moat, right? It's your ability to have an insight through your experience and then go and execute on that. And, that's where, to Sam's point about John, right? It's very rare to find founders with really incredible ideas, but also the ability to do everything you need to do to bring it all together. So we just have to be convinced that, not only are these people selling a potentially very big idea, but have the ability to rally the people needed to make it happen. And that is a very, very difficult thing to do.
Me and Rhys had a conversation yesterday about investing in content. And one of the things that it's actually interesting, like when you're investing in content, what is the due diligence that you do about the content? Do you play games? Is Richard and Sam big time gamers and they can find your Twitch account where you're also streaming at night? Like, how do you deal the content? Why do you think this particular game would be interesting for users? Because I gave up on predicting.
Yeah,
throughout years, I had so many clients would come into me and be like, help me do, adjust this and this and this. And I would put recommendations and they'd be like, no, we'll just keep it as is. We don't have time before release. Next thing you know, they're top 1 grossing game of the world. That was my biggest thing. And I was like, maybe I know nothing sometimes. Yeah. Maybe I do know something. So how do you do that?
Games are interesting because they're, unlike, films and TV shows, and a lot of other things that we've seen, even records and so on. With games, you don't have to make your best piece of content the day you release it. And in fact, you almost never will. And so what's so interesting about this space and why the team building the content is far more important than even what the idea is when it's initially pitched is you really have an opportunity to refine and rework and iterate on and really build both the content experience, which is going to be forever changing, particularly in a lot of the games that we are especially interested in, and games that are going to be operated on and built over time. And you just want to make sure you've got the people that have the creative vision and edge and experience to to create and develop a game, but also to ship a game and market a game, and that really means market a game from its release throughout its life cycle and really build community and so on. So I mean, those are all things that have not been available in other forms of content and are really unique and special about games. And so we pay a lot of attention to that. I think we're constantly reminding ourselves that our specific creative preferences may or may not be determinative. Richard and I have tried to build as diverse a team as possible. And I guess at some point we'll probably talk more about team, but for us, like, such a big part of this, especially if you recognize how creative the industry is let's make sure that we have people, that have been far more passionate and devoted to games, and been diehard gamers for a lot longer than I have for certain, and even Richard. I mean, we have some of the young guys on our team, despite being 15 years younger than me, have been, obsessively playing games for 10 years longer than I could have possibly.
Questions. And so the thing that Sam and I have challenged our team to do is, okay, how do we make this process scalable in a way that's really transparent, to your question, Ninel?
Yeah.
And one of the things we're going to do actually in the next month or two is actually publish our kind of initial scorecard of what we're looking for, right? I mean, you can imagine the why, the what, the who, the when, the where types of questions, and then under each of these things, we're actually going to go so far as to ask specific questions around, target market, why this idea, how many other people have this problem? How do you know they have this problem? What are you doing to solve it? Tell us a bit more about, yourself as a team, how you guys get along as founders, what special insights you have about this space that others don't, what's the secret sauce here? Like, why is now the right time? We go through this set of questions that we ask ourselves as we're preparing investment memos. And from a process standpoint, we're going to have all of this be scored by our team. Yeah. And the things that hit a certain threshold, we're gonna take to the next level, right?
But let's start with an essential one, the pitch process, the selling the story, the making you look good, the connecting to the souls of people so they believe and trust your money. You had a buzzword of sandbox. I mean, you guys have in your portfolio a sandbox game, the DazzleRocks, right? Was it like they came in with the pitch and they're like, we're a sandbox game studio, and you're like, yes, here's a chat, right? Or like Mythical games, then one of my favorite people, the Blankos, which is a party game, which is a huge universe that they're building. In comparison, like Big Run Studios, which is a little bit a different type of a project and type of a content that includes real money betting, right? Yeah. What made those pitches interesting for you and for other investors, if you guys can share?
Well, it's actually interesting that you picked the three investments that you did, because actually I think they identify very different ways that we might find and get excited about a project and a team. In the case of Mythical, John Linden, who founded Mythical, he actually coincidentally was the president of the first game studio that I invested in, a company called Seismic Games, and was really instrumental in, he'd been at Activision and before that in a long...
Skylanders.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so he came in and he was instrumental in helping to sell that business to Niantic, which they got done in 2016. And so for me, John was on like the shortest possible list of heavily vetted, super credible entrepreneurs. And in that case, it was like, okay, do we know, at the time it was a deck, but it was, do we trust that John is going to be able to build a AAA game that people want to play, that that he's going to know how to market and ship and create community around. And he wanted to do this innovative sort of, boundary pushing thing around digital objects with blockchain technology. And we said, you know what, we trust for certain he knows how to build a great game and ship one and market one and run one and all the things we've said. And so this is a very easy bet to make on somebody that we couldn't trust more as a founder, and he's going to build an incredible team around him and so on.
Oh, she actually did.
He has,
seen
for
the
sure.
deck when in the early stages when it was him and Rudy, and now they're like a team of like what, 30, 40 people, or
yeah,
and growing.
more. And their alpha Blancos is out. They've done an enormous console deal. They've done, I mean, what they're building there, and for people who have a chance to check it out, I highly recommend jumping in and checking out Blancos.
So nothing about the game itself when you were investing in it. All about John Linden. And by the way, if you guys know John Linden, you're gonna give him money.
There are those types of people where, as a venture investor, you say, you know what, I'm in the business of working with and empowering incredible people, and if I believe this person is incredible and he's building a team that feels the same way, the idea is somewhat less important than the founder.
I believe you guys invest in playable worlds, right, Raf?
Absolutely.
I mean, Raf is absolutely one of those guys.
These are very long-term relationships, right? Playable worlds is a very good example. And to Raf and Eric's credit, they spent more time diligencing us, honestly, than perhaps any other company in our portfolio. And that was very smart of them, right? Because if you have a budget for a game in the tens of millions, like a $50 million type of game, and you're raising a $10 million round, this is clearly not the last chapter in the book. And so you have to have that degree of mutual confidence in each other to recognize that, hey, this is like getting married, right? This is a very long-term relationship, and we're gonna have to support each other through the unexpected things that are inevitably gonna arise, right?
It's interesting because as we talk about these founders, it's like, we have a similar investment in Leslie Benzies and his studio. Leslie, who was really the creative force behind the Grand Theft Auto franchise.
Sure. Build a Rocket Boy, right? And is
build a Rocket Boy, and is building another thing that we don't really talk about because it's very much in stealth mode, but it's another one of these bets where, if you're lucky enough, as Richard and I, have been able to be now that we have the opportunity to work with these great people in this space, we're gonna take those opportunities as long as they make some sense. And in this case, we were able to meet Leslie and get to know him a little bit. And then when we heard and saw what he's built, it was just like one of these opportunities to be a part of something that we really believe is gonna further transform an industry that he's already had an enormous role in getting us this far.
I'm very excited about it myself as a consumer. Yeah, so I have to say.
But because you asked about DazzleRocks too, so I want to just come back full circle because that's a good one that Richard should talk a little bit about, because DazzleRocks, we didn't know the founders, and Richard met the CEO founder Stella, and that was an example of one where Richard, to his credit, met the team, called me and just said, look, you need to spend some time with these people because I found somebody that is just an exceptional founder and a team that we should get involved with. And Richard, you can tell a little more about that story.
Yeah, so this was Slush last year, and probably the hardest week of my life because for some crazy reason I scheduled over 80 meetings in 1 week. So of the 80 plus meetings, we invested in 2 companies that we met that week. One was Lightheart, as well as DazzleRocks. And I can tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't Stella using a bunch of buzzwords like metaverse or whatever, because if you want to talk about red flags, the type of pitch I really don't love is one where it starts with metaverse 50,000 times before getting into the substance. So don't do that if you're a founder.
Good tip.
With her, it's going back to a lot of what Sam was talking about in terms of clear, credible experience from her time at Rovio and her co-founder, Eunice. They had a ton of experience in understanding what it makes to build a great mobile game, a highly engaging mobile game in a way that can appeal to a diverse audience, both female and males, as well as Western and Asian markets. So that was attractive in the context of the type of title they were building. In the simulation space, there's a lot of titles that have been tremendously successful in multi-$100 million a year type of franchises. The thing that appealed to me right away about what they were building was it wasn't just one of these mindless, I'm gonna go collect my apples, build my town, and just what do I do next? And like a mindless clicker, but much more about some of the emergent, unexpected behavior you get in the context of a community-driven sandbox MMO. And we've never really seen that in mobile, in my opinion, for this type of title. And so, my big hope for this game is that it becomes one of these sandbox environments where there's enough direction so you know what you're doing, but the vast majority of the delight you see in the game is not from the old mindless level up your town, make it look prettier, that type of thing, but what you co-create with others in your community, and all the unexpected things that arise from those shared live experiences. And that's like a broader trend we've invested in across the portfolio, is this belief that, you know, we're gonna see a return to live interactivity across a range of content formats. And the types of things that are gonna work are not things that are live just because the schedule dictates it be live, but because through that kind of co-creation process through a wide, diverse group of people, you get like a sort of delight that you just can't recreate in a single player clicker type of gameplay.
Has there been cases where the founder or the team has not been as known, right? Or, you know, if I want to go and raise money, the first step I should do is go and build my brand, spend half a year or whatever. What if I don't have that time?
Got it.
In building my brand, and then I can go raise money.
Yeah, I'm thinking right now, Richard, of like some good examples of, you know, you can take a company like Koji is a great example. You know, two founders there. Dimitri, who is a well-established, very, you know, has been a successful engineer and an entrepreneur before, and he walked in and in the very first meeting presented us with his young co-founder partner Sean, who the first thing Dimitri said was, I've been in this business for 20 years of identifying talented engineers and putting teams together and so on, and this is the single most talented, impressive, incredible engineering team Dimitri have ever come across. And that's like, you know, I get chills thinking about that, because you see this kid who had, you know, he'd never started a technology company before. He has a co-founder who's vouching for him, and you know, was probably in hindsight underselling, in fact, how talented and special Sean is.
Yeah.
And so that's like a good example of one where it's by no means do you need to be a known celebrity, but you need to really have the goods as a founder and as somebody that is backable. But even better if you're somebody that the world doesn't know yet.
Big Run's a good example of this, actually. So Andrew, you know, has a strong background as, you know, the executive producer on a number of titles like Wizards Unite and other things, but he never built a business before, right? And was very green in that regard. And he was competing in a space that market convention dictated was not venture backable in terms of building a game with skills. And so I think oftentimes, you know, there's a risk in our industry to over-intellectualize to the detriment of focusing on the team, which is what you've repeatedly heard from Sam. You know, trying to convince yourself analytically why this is not venture backable, when in reality you should be focused on team. And that's very much the approach we took with Andrew. And he blew it out of the water with Black Ops, because we knew we were betting on a guy that could deliver, you know, great content, right? And so who cares if no one had ever built a great game on skills before? He was going to be the first guy.
We actually went to that meeting saying, I don't know, are we going to be able to do this or not? Like, we were in the category of people being like, we really like what we've seen, but also, are we going to be smart enough about skills to do this? Or can we get enough information about skills? What's the risk of being involved with skills? We were probably going into the meeting feeling like it was going to be hard to get over that hurdle. And then we met and really spent a couple hours with Andrew and left being like, there's no way we're not backing this guy.
I'll also, to be fair, give an example of what I just said, where I think we may have over-intellectualized the process a bit without relying, and therefore passed, when in hindsight, I mean, it's all early, so who knows ultimately, but
Right.
You know, one of the guys who really impressed me and our whole team when we spoke to him was Seth Sadak at Proletariat.
Yeah.
Unbelievable founder.
Where? Who?
Proletariat.
Seth. I love Seth.
Seth, you guys.
And the reason I mentioned it is because Ninel was one of the people who introduced us to
Yeah, well, and Spellbreak Proletariat's got what, 2 million downloads in first like 2-3 days. So I keep fingers crossed for them.
I've been a big Proletariat fan for long before that Spellbreak ever came out. So like, you know, I'm a huge fan of Seth. To me, he's one of those guys that exemplifies a CEO who's able to raise capital in this space. He clearly is able to do that. And I always tell my clients too that like this is your test as a CEO, is can you raise capital, right?
Well, and I think in hindsight, you know, he also proved even more than that to really know how to build community in such a profound way. I will say that that one, Richard and I were talking about it the other day, where it definitely belongs on that list that we think is going to be, deals that got away and opportunities that we missed. I think it's so fascinating, because going back to that point about just having touch and where experience matters so much. I mean, now having been investing so heavily in studios for another over a year since we first met Seth, which is, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of deals at this point. It's one where I really wonder, like, if that was coming down, across our desk again, and we just had the feelings we had about Seth, and we all loved him as a founder, and and knowing what we now know about community and what's what you're looking for, I like to think that's one that we probably would have just swallowed and paid the price on.
Right. I think you had a question exactly about that, right?
Well, I did actually. Yeah, we were Ninel and I were talking yesterday, and one of the things that I wanted to ask you was about the whole, automated intake of deal flow versus the warm intro. And because, there are many VCs that have the, fill in the blanks on our website and upload your documents and we'll get back to you. And so I'm wondering, like, is that just kind of a red herring? Should savvy startup founders like skirt that automated process and search for the warm handshake? Is that always better? And so I wanted your viewpoints on that more broadly, not just you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to push the envelope a little technologically, we hope, and also like take advantage of the way the world has changed and presumably made it more possible to find great projects that come through that cold or unsolicited process, I guess. I mean, Richard knows this, like, I have a bias, having spent as long as I did in the Hollywood world, where of the thousands and thousands of creative ideas and scripts and so on that I or my team over the years probably received, I can't really think of one example where a great project came from a completely unsolicited process, and so that's going to be the thing that as we try to open that funnel up a little, but in an automated enough way that it doesn't become overwhelming. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge with it. I mean, that being said, there's also an element, and this could cut both ways in terms of the automated versus sort of warm intro, but such an enormous part of success by a founder actually is about their tenacity, is about their ability to build relationships, to get to know the people they need to know. I mean, there very rarely are you investing in the last round of capital that a founder is going to need, and almost never are you the last strategic relationship that they're going to need to build. Right. So the trick with all this stuff is one of the single biggest indicators for me of success in startups is how did they find me in the first place? How did they get to know me or Richard or our team? What did they do to beat down the door? Because they're going to have to do it again and again and again. Right. And so that's the part where I don't know yet whether it cuts more in favor of automated process, or whether what you want to really do is like, how well did they work even if they don't have a warm intro initially, are they able to get one for themselves? All the tools are there. It's never been easier for somebody to figure out, how do I get to know Richard Kim, and who can I talk to, and how do I have a conversation with him? Right. So there's that process. I, for one, would almost always rate that process far higher than a submission that comes through in an automated form.
I think you said that in a sense, it's a signal, right? Whether it comes in warm or whether it comes in across some automated transom. And so I think what you're saying, at least what I get, is if you're a founder and if you're looking for capital, this is one of those tests of, can you navigate, can you make a human connection, and overcome all the obstacles of, they don't want to hear about my idea or me, or they don't know me, I'm nothing, and just really don't care about that and just plow through and make those relationships happen. Then you'll love Ninel.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. Ninel is a perfect example of somebody like this.
Okay, I've decided my product is good enough, I have an audience or whatever other, elements to it, that I'm going to go out and going to raise money. Do I go, on Google and like, venture funds near me? Or do I do Yelp? Or do I go to like a consulting company and, pay them, I don't know, 5%, 10% of how much money they raise in their round, so they do the introductions? Or do I go LinkedIn, and then how do I find the venture fund that, because you said something about they don't know what we're looking for. Like, how do I know what you guys are looking for? And not specifically Galaxy Interactive, but like each specific venture fund. Like, how does that whole process work? If you guys can share any insight. And Rhys, please pitch in as well, because you've done that.
I believe, Richard and I certainly believe, that the future of venture is going to look increasingly like specialized funds, sector-focused funds, and teams of people that really have deep expertise in the particular area that they're focused on. And in the case of interactive content and technology, it's a relatively new thing that there are sector-focused funds for this space. It hasn't been, even 3-4 years ago, there were really no dedicated venture funds that were focused on the interactive content and technology space. So if you're building, hopefully, if you're building and you're a founder that's building a company in the interactive sector, you're gonna look at and identify the list of the firms that have made investments in the space. You're probably gonna, it's still a small enough space and universe of investors that you're probably going to overlap with some other founders who have worked with us, or one or two of the other firms that are focused on interactive.
Do I understand it correctly? And sorry for interrupting. I don't go to Google or Yelp. I have I friend all my friends CEOs on LinkedIn and see who they work with and whether there are any news of them collaborating with venture funds. Or I go to VentureBeat and then read the articles of who are the companies that have invested in the gaming space, and maybe read their reasoning of why they specifically invested in this and this and this in this particular startup. Is that my source?
Yeah, or you could look in, I mean, if you're knowledgeable, like, you could look in PitchBook, which does a very good job of really identifying which firms are out there, which deals have been done. LinkedIn is amazing for actually identifying who's been doing what and finding out, like, if you don't have a warm relationship to somebody, it's certainly a great place to start and figure out how you get one. So,
what about like some consultants that I know of, like some agencies and stuff that can help you raise money? Is that an effective way in your experience? Have you dealt a lot with that, or it's more of like, people pitching?
I think there's very few seed or early stage companies that are engaging bankers to raise money for them. There's a little bit of a bias against that, I think, because there are really only a couple of really, and this is again the benefit of being a sector focused or such a narrowly focused business, but there are only a couple of really credible, high quality game studio interactive content focused bankers out there. And so we've actually found a couple of the best deals, or what appear to be the best deals in our portfolio, have actually been introductions to us through one or another of the bankers out there in the space. And so that is definitely, I mean, if you've got a company that, and you're a strong founder and one or two of these people, and really it's, you talk about Areem in the UK as a bank that really knows gaming incredibly well, and we have a great relationship with those guys, and they've been instrumental for us in meeting some great companies. And there's LionTree here in New York that also has a really active gaming practice. So I mean, those are gatekeepers where if a company comes in through Ryan at Areem, we are going to feel very highly confident that it's a terrific deal and substantially vetted. But I would say, with the exception of one or two places like Areem or LionTree, the odds of a random sort of money-raising broker-dealer identifying a great game company are pretty slim.
The thing that I love about gaming industry, and why I don't see myself in working in anywhere else, and I have a lot of respect for you, Sam, to be in entertainment and in Hollywood for years, because for me it's like a no-go because of how the relationships and deals are made mostly in the industry specifically. But gaming industry is just so collaborative, and I'm highly encouraging everyone, just like reach out to your contacts and friends. Usually everyone is like, sure, I'll do an introduction, because we're all in it. The best way for us to grow is to raise each other up. So don't be shy, contact friends and ask for help. How do you price your business? Like, how do you know, are you worth of $1 or are you worth of $100 million? Especially like on a seed round, like when you like, I think it's a little easier when you can have a multiplier to your, EBITDA or whatever other numbers that are there in the industry. But what if you're a seed round startup? Like, how do you not lose by pricing yourself too low because you have this idea?
I mean, you guys know the general approach here is, you're worth X if one person is interested. You're worth 2X if 2 people are interested. You're worth 5X if 3 people are interested. Which I'm kidding, but to be honest, like with seed rounds in particular, I mean, there is, and this is another area where gaming it's helpful that it's a relatively small sector, and I think there's a somewhat understood range in terms of seed rounds, and some of that has to do with the experience of the team. Some of that has to do with how much product has been built. I mean, it's all again more art than science in terms of what the right price is. But you try to find. I think all early stage investors should really be focused on striking the right balance between pricing themselves to hold on to enough of the business, because it's going to be a long run most of the time. So not taking crazy dilution, but also not creating a situation where they've even if they can succeed at raising capital at a really a high valuation, it's generally not advisable to do that for a whole lot of reasons. I mean, the easiest way to answer the question is just to say you can really think about the amount of dilution that you would expect on each round that you raise, and then look at what the particular business is trying to do in terms of how much capital they're raising, and back into a number that way. And that usually lands you in a reasonably bound range.
Well, okay, if you guys can give me some direction, like what I read on like venture bid stuff, there's like the seed rounds are anywhere between 500,000 to like maybe $1 or $2 million in states. Correct me if I'm wrong.
The first question I would ask is, what type of business is this, and how much capital is it going to need, not just for this round, but over the life of its kind of likely venture financed history, right? Because to Sam's point about dilution, that's generally the starting point in terms of how I think about what the right valuation is. I think people read too much into the valuation number itself. All of VC at the end of the day is a game of number go up, right? And when you invest in a company at whether a 10 or a 20, you're making a bet that if they need to raise more capital in future rounds, that someone will come in and invest in the company at some multiple of where you invested. So in that sense, I totally agree with Sam. It's more art than science. But the science part comes in terms of, okay, do we think if you're trying to raise $5 million as your seed round, the problem with that approach, if that's your first round, is if you have what a normal dilution target of say 20 to 25%, right? Let's say 25%. That implies a post-money valuation of $20 million. So if your starting round is, I think my company is worth 15 million pre-money, you have to believe a lot to invest in that, right? Contrast that with the kind of Finnish pre-seed mobile studio type of approach, where I'm valuing a company at 2 million and I'll give them 300,000 until they can prove XYZ milestone. And I'm pretty sure they're going to hit that milestone because, I'm so operationally involved in the company. And so, my IRRs look great because I'm pretty sure they'll hit that next milestone. But I think people are just reading a bit too much into the difference between that and, the types of companies where that clearly doesn't work because you just have to raise more capital, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, or so they still are convinced they need to raise $5 million. So then they think they're doing something great by raising it at a relatively low valuation, and then you're looking at this business for the next round, and the cap table's all upside down because they've already given away too much of the business. So I mean, the short answer, Ninel, is it with gaming in particular, and where there really are milestones available that are pretty easy to monitor and see whether things are working. That's why you're seeing most, and certainly mobile game studio is a great example. Well, it's almost always, the answer is almost always going to be raise a small, whether you want to call that a pre-seed or a seed round, and prove things out, because in very, very, very few situations is it gonna, by the time you do the sort of analysis Richard's talking about and you look at what they're doing and what they want to build, is it gonna make sense for someone to just come out of the gate with a big raise. Now the exceptions there are if you really have an amazing proven team, an incredible product. Maybe they've just taken it up upon themselves to build something prior to even raising outside capital, and so they're showing up with a pretty strong indication of what they're going to make, if not even a vertical slice of it. They've got their team in place. It might be called a seed round, but it really looks more like a Series A, and you can justify it, the sort of higher price that would be necessary to raise a $5 million round out of the gate.
I'm just looking at it from a perspective of what can you do with $300,000, taking into account the engineering salaries and like the artist salaries? It's like barely two engineers and a quarter of an artist. Like, well,
I mean, quite a bit in some instances, and obviously part of this is geographically dependent too. Well, I mean, we're finding that you see teams that can do a whole lot more coming from part of the world well, but coming from Europe, let's say, than Silicon Valley.
I am looking for
Silicon Valley.
Are you a friend of his?
Yeah, no, yeah. I get you.
And the Nordics and so on.
I think there's another dimension of, one of the things that Silicon Valley talks about quite a bit is, the whole Carlota Perez theory about production capital versus financial capital. And, in mobile, it's interesting, right? If you have a game that's working, right? You have short ROAS payback periods, and you really just need UA financing to scale. At a certain point, it may not make sense for venture to be the right answer for your next round, but instead to focus more on, UA financing options and receivables financing, basically, as a way to scale your business, right? And so I think we're at an interesting inflection point in the industry where I think some of these debt-based alternatives may actually be the right option once we've hit a certain amount of product market fit.
I was recently listening to How I Built It, Dyson version of the podcast, and incredible story. Dyson still owns 100% of his company because instead of going to VCs, he just went to the bankers because he 100% knew that what he's building is going to be relevant on the market. And I think from like nothing, they went to $100 million in like a year or two with the money that they got from the bank. Obviously, in my understanding, you already have to have revenues to get the money from the bank, which might not be necessarily the truth. There are different banks with different opportunities, but something to look into for people who are watching this. I want to be mindful about the time, so I have a couple more questions left before we all go. And one of them is, if I raised $5 million, should I expect $5 million to be in my account tomorrow, or is it coming in within, like, as you mentioned, certain milestones, or should I wait? Like, what's the, like, when people announce, this company got 5 mil, what actually happens?
You generally see the announcements come out, I'd say 2 to 5, maybe even 6 months after the closing date of funding. Our process is we like to front load a lot of our work so that we basically have investment committee level detail prior to committing to a term sheet. Just because we view term sheet as binding, even though legally it's technically not. And so, I would say it's usually a couple-week process to get to the point where we have conviction to send out a term sheet or commit to a term sheet if we're following. And then I think you can generally count on 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the nature of the deal, between term sheet and closing, which is usually synonymous with funding. So in terms of overall time frame, I think the part that a lot of entrepreneurs don't expect is that kind of 4 to 8 week lag between, I have a signed term sheet versus I have money in my bank account. So that's definitely important to consider. And then obviously the period leading up to I have a signed term sheet can take several months as well. Wow. And this is one reason why, when we fund companies, we generally look to do so with an 18-month time horizon, if at all possible.
So I have to have 18 months of cash in my bank account to cover the expenses of the team before I actually have the money from the moment I started. We fund companies to an 18-month runway because we don't want to fund companies with a 3-month runway and then have them be out raising again immediately. So
you want the team to have time to actually crank and do their work.
Yeah, and so much of it depends on the nature of the deal as well. Like if it's one of these companies that, frankly hasn't hit product market fit and we think will require a lot of experimentation and iteration, we want ideally more than 18 months, right?
So, Rhys, in your experience, like if the 18 months is, I understand is like somewhat, common in the market, it pretty much means that the founder needs to be all the time on the road raising money rather than working in the business, especially if you're having like a long-term product that would need investment and iterations and, UA money and all of that at some point, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
So I think any good founder is always making relationships, and always making connections for the future. They're always having conversations, right? But they don't necessarily go out and hardcore pitch to raise their next round until they figured out their kind of timeline. You don't want to be out of money when you raise successfully your next round either. You want to have a little bit of cushion, and this is probably a 6-month process at least. So you just kind of do the backwards math. At least that's what I've seen from the guys that I work with.
So it's a continuous process.
That is kind of unique to the venture space for games, because there are an increasing number of strategics that also invest, and they invest at seed and A as well, so fairly early. Do you guys, as a financial investment organization versus a strategic, do you have any thoughts on that? On companies that come to you for an A, who have raised their seed from a strategic or have a strategic investor on board? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Are you ambivalent?
I think it really depends. I mean, it depends on what they're building, on how captured the company may be by the strategic, whether it may, whether we value it as a good thing that they have that partnership. I don't think in the game space it's the same, or it's as often true that like strategic money is I think of the traditional venture world, people sometimes look at it as like, oh, well, that's strategic money. They're not necessarily, good financial investors, and it's a warning sign. But in the case of gaming, there can be some, because again, it's such an industry that's so specialized, there can be, great teams that are backed by strategic partners, and it can mean that you have a pretty good path to an exit if they're going to buy the rest of the business and so on. So I'm certainly not scared away by companies that have been backed by strategics. We haven't really seen, and Richard, correct me if I'm misremembering, but I don't think we've seen any like Series A opportunities that come that have been solely backed by strategics up to that point or something like that so far. I can't think of any off the top of my head. We certainly have looked at and invested in businesses that we enter the round. And the strategic is investing with us. Mm-hmm. Actually, I can think of one big example there where having the strategic on board was a huge benefit, which is Leslie's company, right? Where NetEase has been a big investor of his from the beginning. They also had institutional VC money in the prior rounds as well.
So have you invested during pandemic, and what are the steps that you had before in your due diligence process before pandemic, and what are the steps that have been added into your due diligence, with the pandemic, if that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, I just happen to be looking at it right now on my screen. I think I'm counting. I think we've made 20 investments since March 20th. That's 19 or 20 investments since March 20th. So we've absolutely invested during and throughout the pandemic. Some of those were, because there's always a lag time between when you start working on a company and thinking about making an investment to actually making an investment. So the first batch of those, the 7 or 8, let me see, or maybe even 10 of them or so were companies that we were working on pretty substantially before the pandemic. And actually more than that. I would say, looking at it now, I would say almost 75 or 80% of them were companies that we had started working on well before the pandemic. So
what about the 20? Like, I think that's the most interesting part for everyone. Like the people who are just starting, what was the process that is different for them versus the process for the 80% or the rest of the companies that you had before?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple on here. Looking at the list, there are a couple on here that we one or two that were pretty big checks, where we still have not met the founders in person. The process was usually an introduction to the opportunity from somebody. Our process is, unless if it's something we seek out actively, like Richard or I, then then obviously we would have set a call or something and know who we're targeting. If it's an opportunity that comes into us through somebody else, depending on how that introduction is made, we either take the first call ourselves if it's a real warm introduction to me or to Richard directly, where it really makes sense for us to have the first conversation. And in most of the companies we've invested in, that's been the case where we know them. We know the company, or Richard and I have met the founders before we introduce them to our junior team. But increasingly, we're trying, particularly on deals where the intro comes in from somebody, but it's appropriate for Zach or Michael or Mustafa to sort of tee it up and figure out whether this is something that is going to really go the distance for us. We may, after either a very brief introduction or even just an email exchange, suggest that they spend some time with Zach and Michael and Mustafa and talk about what they're building, and give those guys the opportunity to really look at and evaluate and summarize for us what the opportunity is, why it should matter, and so on. So we try to create some layers in terms of let those guys get in there, dig in, form an opinion, share it with us, and then usually if it's something that they're interested in, and they at this point they just know our taste and our preferences well enough, that after that we'll do a team call with all 5 of us on the phone. And now that would have been a meeting pre-COVID, and now it's a Zoom, and it's and then it's usually some number of follow-on conversations, management questions, etc. And then we'll get to a point where we make a decision internally.
I appreciate your time, gentlemen. Thank you so much. I hope we
Thank you
have
guys,
a lot of people.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks.
We'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.